वाहिगुरू जी की फतेह। श्री भगवती जी सहाय वार श्री भगवती जी की पातशाही 10वीं। प्रथम भगवती समर गए गुरु नानक लई त्याय, फिर अंगत गुर ते अमरदास रामदास से होए सहाय। अर्जन हर गोबिंद नूं सिमरो श्री हर राय, श्री हर कृष्ण ते आई है जिस डिठे सब दुख जाए। तेग बहादुर सिमरिया करना उन द्यावे ताए, सब थाई होए सहाय 10वें पातशाह गुरु गोबिंद सिंह जी महाराज सब थाई होए सहाय। 10 पातशाहियां दे पुत्र आत्मक स्वरूप श्री गुरु ग्रंथ साहिब जी के पाठ दीदार था ध्यान तर के खालसा साहब बोलो जी वाहिगुरू। गरीब नवाज आप जी दे 5 प्यारे 4 साहिबजादे 40 मुक्त हटियां जपियां तपियां शहीदां मरीदां सत्यारियां प्यार जना माइयां बीबियां अपने बच्चों टुकड़े टुकड़े करवा के झोलियां पवाए गले दे हार बनाए नीजियां ते टंगवाए सवा सवा मन दे पीसन पीसे सिक्खी सिद्ध केसां स्वासां संग निभाया तिन्ना सिंगां सिंगणियां भुजंगियां दी कमाई दा ध्यान धर के खालसा साहब बोलो जी वाहिगुरू। श्री ननकाना साहब तो लैके आप चाल नगर श्री हजूर साहब तक सब गुरुद्वारे गुरधाम चौंकियां झंडे बुंगे पंजां तख्तां दा ध्यान धर के खालसा साहब बोलो जी वाहिगुरू। प्रथम सरबत खालसा जी की अरदास है जी। सरबत खालसा जी को वाहिगुरू 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 नाम चित आवे चित आवन का सदका सर्ब सुख होवे। जहाँ जहाँ गुरु खालसा जी साहिब तहाँ तहाँ रचिया रियायत देख देख की फतेह ब्रत की पैश पंथ की जीत श्री साहिब जी सहाय। खालसा जी के बोल बाले बोलो जी वाहिगुरू। सिखां दा मन नीवा मत उची मत पत के रखे आप अकाल पुरख जी। सिखां नूं सिक्खी दान केस दान रहत दान विवेक दान विसाह दान भरोसा दान दाना सिर दान नाम दान श्री अमृतसर साहिब जी दे दर्शन इशनान बख्शिश करो जी। गरीब नवाज गुरुद्वारा ननकाना साहिब पंजा साहिब अते होर गुरुद्वारे गुरधाम जिन्हां तो आप जी दे पंथ नूं विछोड़िया गया है उन्हां दे खुले दर्शन दीदार अते सेवा संभाल दा दान अपने खालसा जी नूं बख्शो। हे निओटियां दी ओट गुरु ने आसरियां दे आसरे गुरु धन धन गुरु नानक देव जी धन धन गुरु गोबिंद सिंह साहब 10 पातशाहियां दे पुत्र आत्मक स्वरूप धन धन गुरु ग्रंथ साहब दतार दोए कर जोड़ करूं अरदास तुद भावे ताने रास। हे गरीब नवाज जी आप जी दे चरण कमलां च अरदास बेनती आप जी दी बख्शिश होई। गरीब नवाज अपने संगतां सेवकां नूं प्रबंधकां नूं गरीब नवाज विद्वान वीरां नूं आप जी ने कृपा कीती उद्यम बख्शे उत्साह बख्शे अंग संग के सहायता बख्शी दतार साहिब श्री गुरु ग्रंथ साहिब जी की 3जी सालाना कानफ्रेंस सच्चे पातशाह जी हो रही है। आप जी के सेवकों आप जी ने उद्यम बख्शिया कृपा करो दतार पिता जी कानफ्रेंस हो रही है सच्चे पातशाह जी आरंभ करने तो पहला आप दे चरणों च अरदास बेनती है कृपा करो सच्चे पातशाह जी मेहर भरिया हथ अपने प्रबंधकों के सेवादारों के सिर ते रखो आंग सांग हो के सहायता बख्शो दतार अपने सेवकों के सारे कार्य निर्विघ्नता सह संपूर्ण करने शुद्ध ते पवित्र सेवा लैन की कृपालता करनी कृपा करो गरीब नवाज विद्वान वीरां दे सिर ते मेहर पर हथ रखना अति अपने सेवकों को आप सेवा लैनी चढ़दी कला में सेवा बख्शिश करनी कृपालता करो। खालसा पंथ च एकता इतफाक प्यार की बख्शिश करके सत संतोख की दात बख्शो सत संतोख की दात बख्शो। गरीब नवाज अपने सेवकों विद्वान वीरां प्रबंधकों सदा अपने चरणों की सेवा की सदा भावना बख्शिश करो। इस तरह अपने सेवकों तो सेवा लेंदे रहने वास्ते कृपालता करो चढ़दी कला च सेवा बख्शो। गरीब नवाज अंग संग हो के सहायता बख्शो। गरीब नवाज विण बोलिया सबके जान रखे सागे की अरदास आप दे चरण कमलों च अरदास बेनती कृपा करो बख्शिश करो। इस वेले मेहर भरे हथ अपने सेवकों के सारिਆਂ ਦੇ सिर ते रखो कृपा करो अते कानफ्रेंस आरंभ करने वास्ते दतार पिता जी आग्ञा बख्शो। सुख होवै नाम चितावै नानक नाम चढ़दी कला तेरे पाने सरबत। वाहिगुरू जी का खालसा वाहिगुरू बोले सो निहाल सत श्री अकाल। वाहिगुरू जी का खालसा वाहिगुरू जी की फतेह।
ये जो कॉन्फ्रेंस है साड़ी 3जी कॉन्फ्रेंस है इट्स ए कोलैबोरेशन बिटवीन सिख गुरुद्वारा सैन होजे एंड चढ़दी कला फाउंडेशन। सानू पिछलियां 2 कॉन्फ्रेंसिस तो बहुत सोहना रिस्पॉन्स मिलिया तो इस खुशी में असी इस प्रोग्राम में कंटिन्यू कर रहे हाँ। सो कॉन्ग्रेचुलेशनस टू चढ़दी कला फाउंडेशन एंड सिख गुरुद्वारा सैन होजे। तो हुण मैं बेनती करांगा सरदार भुपिंदर सिंह ढिल्लों जो कि साडे जनरल सैकटरी हैं सिख गुरुद्वारा सैन होजे आप जी का स्वागत करन से समथिंग एंड वेलकम सो प्लीज़।
वाहेगुरु जी का खालसा, वाहेगुरु जी की फतेह. On behalf of San Jose Gurdwara Prabandhak Committee, I welcome all of you, and even those who have not arrived yet. I know some of the speakers have come long ways, and I want to thank all of you, especially those who accepted the invitation second or third time. Thank them to accept our invitation and join us in this conference. From my prior experience in the two conferences, I figured that from these speeches are on very serious matter, and so they don't quite sink in right after you hear the speech. And in the past, they have been kind enough to provide the transcripts, and Chardi Kala Foundation has been putting it on the online immediately, and I am sure that all the speakers are going to do it this time on a timely basis. I asked all the attendees to go and read some of those speeches, because I feel that you get more out of it if you follow by reading those speeches. And also tell some of your friends who are not able to attend today, at least read those speeches. From this last conference, we got the idea that we need to do more of this type of programs. Instead of committing more often conferences like this, we decided that we will do a Gurbani Vichar program, which Chardi Kala was already doing it at their facility. So they started doing it in the Gurdwara Khalsa School classroom. And I think it is on second Sunday of every month, from 9 to 11, I believe. 11 to 1. So attending those programs is also very, very helpful. The topics discussed are similar to what the conference is going to be. And they can probably continue more elaborate, and one-on-one interaction can happen there. So thank you very much. And we have excellent speakers. You will enjoy the conference. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
I request Dr. Indermohan Singh, who is chairman of the Chardi Kala Foundation, to welcome you all.
Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. I want to second Bhupinder Dhillon and welcome all of you to this conference, and thank all the speakers who have taken the trouble and the time to come here and prepare their talks. And as you've seen, we have the papers from the previous conference available outside, and the Sikh Review did a special issue with all the papers from that conference. And I'm happy to announce that next year, Nishan is going to do a special issue. That's the other major magazine for the Sikh community. So there are two major magazines, the Sikh Review and Nishan, and both of them are in the process of supporting this conference. As Bhupi said, the papers are a very valuable long-term resource that comes out of these conferences. We have them all on the Chardi Kala website, and they're being published in these special issues. So we will look for the speakers to turn in their papers promptly, so we can actually move ahead with getting that special issue of Nishan published. So we are running a little late already, so I'm going to stop here and also request the session chairs and the speakers to try to keep to the schedule so we can keep the conference moving on. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
Our first session chair is Sardarni Reshma Kaur, and I'll request her to come and introduce the first two speakers for the first session.
Sat Sangat Jiyo, Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Such a beautiful day in the Silicon Valley, and what a wonderful occasion to get together at this fabulous conference. This is a great fortune that we can all be here. This is my second conference. I attended the first one, and this time I was being lucky enough to be called to introduce the very distinguished speakers. So let me start with the first speaker, Professor I.J. Singh Ji. I've had the good fortune of knowing Professor I.J. Singh Ji, I call him Uncle, since the past 18 years. Like a lot of us from the East Coast, he's a very near and dear person, very close to our hearts. And today, I'd like to invite him to share his perspective on his topic today, translation and transliteration of Gurbani. He's going to talk about how to uncover the universality and timelessness of the message of the Guru Granth Sahib. Clearly, it would be by forging a connection with the Guru Granth. This requires a message be available to all, irrespective of their ethnicity or primary culture. Professor Saab, please welcome.
So, Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. It's an honor to be starting the day. It's a day of conversations, really. Conversations on how Guru Granth speaks to us today. My position is that I need not tell you that for it to be universal and timeless, the Guru Granth must speak to us today in America, as it did to countless other centuries ago in Punjab, or else it loses all relevance. Now, other speakers will tell you today about the message of the Guru Granth. I will talk more about how we come to terms with the message. Not the message itself, but how we come to terms with it. There is perhaps no country or continent today where Sikhs are not. Wherever we have ventured, we have taken our lifestyle, family values, cuisine, song and dance, our enterprising spirit along with Sikhi, a unique, universal, timeless heritage that makes us what we are. But now, more than ever, Sikhs are growing up outside the linguistic and cultural cocoon of Punjab and Punjabi. The mythological antecedents of India shaped us, not because they were essential to Sikhi, but because mythology was the overarching cultural context of India. This is now alien to a new generation of Sikhs. We dearly value our mother tongue, Punjabi, but within our lifespan, it has diminished to a transactional presence, limited to social banter, music, and humor. We are not comfortable enough to pick up a book of poetry, history, or philosophy in it, and usually we don't. So the education of the mind is often effectively stalled. Guru Granth, traditionally penned in the Gurmukhi script, with copious references to mythology, Gurbani showcases many Indic and Middle Eastern languages extant when it was composed 300 to 500 years ago. It does not endorse mythology, but is written in the vernacular, frames the teaching to resonate with the average Indian of that time. Now, two imperatives emerge when we engage with the Guru Granth Sahib. Translations connect us with Gurbani without disconnecting us from the modern world in which we live. But there are many languages in Guru Granth. Remember that India is a country of nation states that were for much of history semi-autonomous, each with its own narrative. Indian languages, like others, show many regional and dialectical variations, like French and Spanish do, for instance. Then there is the fact that Guru Granth is mystical, revealed poetry, teeming with allegories, metaphors, and analogies, as all good poetry is. And the enormity of the task of translating Guru Granth into modern English or any other language becomes obvious. Also, many Sikhs today cannot read the Gurmukhi script in which the Guru Granth is penned. Sikhs are and will remain a minority no matter where they live, even in India. This reduces Punjabi and Gurmukhi script effectively to a minority language that is not commonly studied. For many Punjabis and Sikhs, it is mostly a spoken language today. That there is a generation of Sikhs who do not comfortably read Gurbani. Now, they need translations to to comprehend Guru Granth and transliteration into Arabic or Roman script to read it. So translation has an equally troublesome twin beside it, and that is transliteration. Now we need different sets of professionals to do things right. Different sets of professionals. The people who do translation, well, they have to be different. We need linguists and scholars of Sikhi who know the two languages intimately, their lexicon, grammar, historical, cultural context, and who can seamlessly travel between the two. For translation, we need masters of phonetics in the two spoken languages and the cultures involved. Translation is frustrating, but we think it's easy, and it is not. Transliteration is easier to come to terms with. Our sacred writings are cast in inspired poetry that to us is divine. So let's talk about translations first, then we'll come to transliteration second. And I don't need to tell you the difficulty in deciphering the mind of a poet when he plays with words, language, and meter. For example, take the word chintan, chinta, chinta meaning worry. Now, chinta occurs in Guru Granth as chint, chinta, chinti, even as chind with a D at the end. I suppose these variations reflect the demands of poetry. Or look at the verse from Asa Diwar. Gyan ka badda, mar rahe gur bin gyan na hoye. Or eke chanan hundiyan gur bin kor andar. Now, when we look at the word gur, that's poetry, but is that meant to be read as guru or translated as guru or remain as gur? Sure, the Gyan does come from the Guru, but Guru is a Punjabi commonly used word meaning a technique, a technology, or a method, or a way. So, Gur bin Korandhar, Guru bin Korandhar, either is correct. Gur bin Gyan na hoye or Guru bin Gyan na hoye is correct. What's the translator to do? But in this case, of course, there's not much harm done, no matter which word he uses. That's not always the case. Think a moment of any conversation, no matter how simple, no matter if it's with an arch enemy or a soulmate. Isn't it accompanied by some thought about what the other person really means or understands, and understanding the other demands, tuning into or translating the other's moods, gestures, body language, and words, and mining them for meaning? Translation remains the only effective insight into another mind, and war and peace come from translating or mistranslating each other. We know that every day. Now, the literary output of past civilizations come to us via translations. That's how we know of Homer, the greatest poet of ancient Greece, Virgil and Ovid of similar standing in Rome, Kalidas, the preeminent playwright and poet of ancient India. How accurately does a translation capture the mind and insights of a poet, the beauty of his meter and language? And such questions are rarely settled, but they give birth to new scholars of the original language, also the one in which translation is done, and countless new PhDs result. Times change, as do cultures and languages. The vernacular becomes opaque, literary language even more so. Just a few hundred years later, Chaucer's Canterbury Tales defy comprehension without translation into modern English. Similar hurdles about and engaging other masters like Plato or German Latin scholars. Or let me give you a small example from Gurbani that came to my mind only yesterday as I was listening to some kirtan. And the line literally said, Bako Shubh Rasna. Now, Shubh is, of course, good, blessed, and Rasna is tongue or taste. So speak well, it says. Bako is to speak. But Bako was a respectable word then, when Gurbani was written, not anymore. Bako now comes to us through Bakwas, which in Punjabi is well, in contemporary American English is what you call trash talk. So you can't have trash talk and Shubh Rasna. but the language has changed, the meaning has changed. Does the translator know it? Now, how good is any translation? This admits no easy answer, but it deserves an exploration. As example, let's revisit two classic examples, the poetry of Umar Khayyam and the King James version of the New Testament Bible. And then we will come to Guru Granth and the translation thereof. Now, Umar Khayyam was a Persian poet and astronomer who lived about 1,000 years ago. In some of his quatrains, Rubaiyat have seen at least, he's got a question already. That's okay, I'm glad. Umar Khayyam lived about 1,000 years ago. I said some of his Rubaiyat have been translated into 15 translations into English and many other languages. And why so many English versions? Because people thought that he had not been honest or sincere, or there was a lack of fidelity in the translations. Even he himself published, Fitzgerald published over 30 years, 5 different editions with significant variations among his own translations. So he changed from time to time. Some of his critics dubbed his writing, labeled his writing as the Rubaiyat of Fritz Omar. To change the name. Now, my second example, even more instructive, will come to you from Christianity. Many versions of the New Testament Bible exist. Followers of John Wycliffe gave us the first English translation of the Christian Bible, but it was banned in 1409. So the first translation in English came in 1400 years after Christ. King Henry VIII authorized another version, and then one called the Great Bible in 1568. The Puritans, who were part of the Church of England, did not approve these versions. In 1604, King James convened a conference for a new translation. This new translation, the authorized version of the Bible, was prepared. It took 7 years to do so, between 1604 to 1611, and 47 scholars worked on it for 7 years, all from the Church of England. And opposition to the Bible surfaced immediately. Hugh Broughton, a noted scholar of the day, condemned it in 1611 as it came out. And he said he would rather be torn to pieces by wild horses than that this abominable translation should ever be foisted upon the English people. But 100 years later, that same Bible became the classic, got accepted in all Anglican Protestant denominations. It remains unchallenged today, except by the Roman Catholic Church. And many Sikh sites on the internet are abuzz these days with translation projects. I welcome them, and I also wonder. When my interest in the Guru Granth awakened, my intimacy with its language and grammar was minimal. My stumbling ceased when I discovered the 1966 UNESCO publication, an English translation of selections from the Guru Granth, not entire. By 5 iconic masters of the grammar and lexicon of Sikh scriptures, Tralochan Singh, Jodh Singh, Kapoor Singh, Baba Harkishan Singh, and Kushwant Singh, edited by an English poet, George Fraser. This, I think, is still by far the best translation, way better than any that I have seen. It captures the magic, but the language now seems a little archaic. The book is incomplete. The early 1970s, several translations came in English. Manmohan Singh's phraseology was sometimes awkward, his meaning not always clear, but I learned a lot from it. As translations of Gopal Singh, Tralochan Singh, Sant Singh Khalsa, Pritam Singh Chahal, and Kartar Singh Dugal appeared, I pounced on them, but was left at sea by the language, style, or clarity. In time, I graduated to Punjabi translations by Veer Singh and Professor Sahib Singh, and they too appeared to mix mythological lore with the pristine purity of the Guru's message. All existing translations, bar 2, are solo efforts, one person's endeavor. Exceptions are the UNESCO publication 1966 that I mentioned, and the 4-volume Shabdarat in Punjabi, which is not a translation, but a guide to difficult words, concepts, and the Guru Granth. Published by the SGPC, no single author is identified. Of many that are possible, I offer you brief examples where the traditional translation leave me baffled. How should one literally interpret Farid's recommendation, "Pair tina ke chum," kiss the feet of the enemy. Or for that matter, what to make of the traditional take on the cycle of birth and death? Or that even our smallest action is controlled and pre-written by God, which would then leave us no free will, no option to act otherwise. I don't quite see a creator that Gurbani assures us repeatedly cannot be measured, has no form, shape, caste, color, or gender, that he sits out there somewhere micromanaging my puny existence, keeping track of all my sins committed or contemplated, and yet all my actions are in accord with God's pre-written dossier on me. It seems like an anthropomorphic model of God as the supreme puppeteer. Such matters leave one wondering what exactly the Guru meant. Literal rendition leaves entirely lost, while the interpretation free of the cultural context seems to go beyond the mandate of a translator. Perhaps we need a literal rendering accompanied by a footnote indicating an interpretation of the poetry in modern English. As I see it, a life of hukam, like walking in the shadow of God, transcends Gurbani's literal rendering. It becomes to live wholly in the present, in the moment, to me. To have the courage to change the things we can change, to accept with serenity as hukam what we cannot change, and the wisdom to know the difference. And keep in mind that Gurbani is mystical poetry full of allegories, analogies, and metaphors, seldom to be literally translated. A translator has to know two cultures intimately, their languages, idioms, traditions, the land, the people, the history and mythology that have shaped them, and then to navigate between the two realities seamlessly. Any translation project promises to be a lifelong, unfinished quest. A translator needs to merge the cold-blooded mind of an analyst and grammarian with the warm, joyous heart of a poet in an existence of faith. Even when the language is not so alien or abstruse, differences in interpretation between equally brilliant minds are not uncommon. Look at the laws of any country. Without plausible and differing interpretations of the same law, a society would not need thousands of lawyers, so many different layers of judiciary. The courts would never be so busy ferreting out the truth. What, for example, did the framers of our Constitution really mean? And many people think the framers write like the writing is divine. That's not the issue here. Is ours a Christian nation? How is the line between church and state to be drawn? Do differences in interpretation of civil rights exist or don't they? This says to me that Sikhs will always have to struggle to make sense of what the Guru likely meant for a translation which is likely inadequate, no matter how good it appears, and then that becomes the lifelong path of a Sikh. When I get lost, I am reassured by Gurbani that my smallest hesitant step towards the Guru would be reciprocated by the Guru, covering miles towards me. In other words, grace would prevail, and with cogitation, a sense of the poetry would emerge. And that's how I grew to like less than perfect translations that don't seem easy or adequate. They place the onus on me. I have to stop and wonder if the Guru could have meant what the translator implies. If the translation had been excellent, I might never have made the struggle my own. Guru Granth tells us, "Ditte mukt na hovai jichar sabad na kare vichar." It's not the sight of the Guru Granth, but thoughtful engagement with the word that liberates us. So translation initiatives, have them, but beware of the rocky road ahead. What we translate today is not forever. It will need retranslating and tweaking by every new generation. Explore the translations. Keep at hand the original text of Gurbani. Will it be easy? No. Is it necessary? Like breath to life. Now this brings us to the second, which I think is the easier matter, that of transliteration. I'll give you a couple of examples of bad transliteration. Look at the many imaginative ways we write the opening alphanumeric of the Guru Granth, Ik Oankar, in Roman script. I have seen it rendered as Oankar, Omkar with an M, Onkar with an N, or Onkar with an added G in the middle. And many such examples abound. A phonetics expert could teach us the correct standard enunciation devoid of the baggage of regional variations, could help us record it precisely in Roman or any other script, so that a non-native speaker of Punjabi could sound it out accurately, precisely, replicably. Now, that comes to the techniques of it. A phoneme is defined as the smallest contrasting unit in the sound system of a language that is capable of conveying a distinct meaning. The American language system recognizes a set of 20 to 60 distinct phonemes or sound units, a different number for each spoken language that can be captured in the Roman script, 20 to 60. Now, phonetics is not always a perfect science. For example, some tribal languages have guttural sounds and clicks, and there's no way to render them adequately in the Roman alphabet as we know it. Gurmukhi's alphabet and Gurbani are not easily rendered into Roman script, but in transliteration of Gurbani today there are about as many systems as there are people doing them. And in today's expanding global reality, perhaps Roman script, the most commonly used alphabet system, would have to stretch its dimensions beyond the 60 phonemes that it has. All languages have blind spots. A simple example, the Punjabi ear does not distinguish between the sound of V and W because the language does not make the distinction. English has no phoneme for the distinctions between the hard D like a dog and the combined DH like dha. A phonetics expert can capture these distinctions but likely not show them in written form as it exists today in Roman script. Exactly how and what standard a transliteration is done into the Roman script may spell the difference between success or failure. And the writer and the reader need to be on the same page. An arbitrary decision on pronunciation serves little purpose except to show discard. Please note that what follows now, I want to give you one example, and then I'll be done. It's not a judgment of what is right or wrong, merely an example of where an amateur like me can easily go astray. Look at the expression Guru Fateh. Simple, universally used. I have seen Guru spelled on the internet as G-O-R-O-O, widely. Guru is what I would say if I were reading it as I learned reading in grade school by sounding it out. And that is not quite what is intended here. Then look at Fateh. F-A-T-E-H sounds pretty close to what we want it to be. But then Fateh is transcribed variously as F-A-T-I-H, Fateh, which is okay, close enough. F-A-T-A-H, Fatah, Fatah. That sounds a little bit like Al-Fatah, the Palestinian organization. I'm not sure that's what we want. Or P-H-A-T-I-H, I have seen. And P-H-A-T-A-H, Phata. Phata like torn in Punjabi. So Guru Phata is not really a very complimentary designation for the Guru. May even sound blasphemous. So in summary, the issue is how to standardize the way to capture sounds that don't exist in English into Roman script. Remember that sounding it out is how we all learned the fundamentals of ABC and the joy of reading. There is no question that we need both a standardized translation and standardized transliteration of Gurbani, and these are not what a single scholar, no matter how good, can or should handle alone. We need linguists steeped in Sikhi as well as experts of phonetics to work in tandem, produce a standardized body of knowledge that remains a work in progress, puts us on the path to progress, a never-ending system that would have to be tweaked by every new generation and redone. So translation and transliteration, a very different species of animals. It's eminently doable, but each demands our full, enduring, and clear-headed engagement, and nothing less would do. And I thank you very much indeed. SLOBS stands for Society for the Lack of Objectivity, not bias. Bias we have. Because in my view, or in our students' view, objectivity really does not exist. We function in life with different degrees of subjectivity. And I can say that as a scientist. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Saab. That was a very, a good, insightful view at the pros and cons of translation and transliteration. So we've actually handed out some flashcards. If anybody has any questions. So I'll read out the first question we have from the audience. You have outlined very strict boundaries for a successful translation. Is that realistic?
Well, translation is a difficult art, you know. You really, in essence, you're trying to capture the intent of the writer, of the poet. What did he really mean? That's why I gave you the example of Gur and Guru. Gur means Kuvrandar. Now, in that case, it does not make a difference if the Guru meant that without the Guru it's pitch darkness, or without the method or the way it is darkness. It would not matter very much. But in another place, it could matter. So in translation, and that's why I gave you the examples of Omar Khayyam's so many translations, because what you capture, of course, is what's in your mind. That's why the bias comes in. Nothing that we do is free of bias. No, it's like I'm objective and everybody else is subjective. That's not quite true. We operate from a bias of a lifetime. So can I capture what the Guru meant? Only the Guru knows. And if my understanding of Gurbani changes with time, obviously the Guru's message did not change, but my understanding of it changed. And we all understand the same message of the Guru in as many different ways as there are of us. And that is why there are more opinions than people in our Gurdwaras and meetings. I like that. There's no way to guarantee that I have the absolute truth and everybody else is mistaken. So I'm afraid that I have talked about your question without giving an answer. Yes and no, and I'm afraid that has been my way all my life. And that's my bias. And I'm right. That laid the whole thing to rest. I'm sorry?
Yeah. Bache, can you have somebody pass them out, please? Thank you.
What we need to learn in our Gurdwara and so on, while the questions papers are being distributed, we need to learn to be able to differ freely, because we all come from different points of view, without becoming disagreeable. And that is the crucial condition. Without thinking that the other person is differing with me because his intentions are bad. I think there's a line about that, and I can't think of it at the moment, in Chopai. That we all use different levels of our sense that somebody gave us. I remember somebody different with me once at a meeting, and he said that, I'm giving you exactly what the Guru's message is. This is what the Guru told me. I said, well, unfortunately, what Guru told me is slightly different. What can I say? It's my understanding that's different.
So we have many other questions. So yes. Shall we move on to the next question?
Please do. I was just filling the time.
Okay. So here's another question. So the danger of translation is, and opening it up to other ethnicities and people speaking different languages, is that sometimes we might ourselves become lazy and just adopt the Romanized version. So the question is, when you talk to Khalsa school students, right, and you ask them, why do you come to Khalsa school and learn Punjabi? And the three big reasons we learn is, number one, we can take it as a second language in high school and pass. The second is we can talk to our grandparents and not feel embarrassed when we go to India. And the third is so we can actually learn and to read the Guru Granth Sahib. And then if you even take the example of Judaism, and you see that they have embraced the diaspora of Jews has embraced whatever culture, whatever country they're in. However, they are very strict and staunch about the fact that at the bar mitzvah or the bat mitzvah, they will learn Aramaic, which is a language that the Old Testament is written in, and they will always go back to the common ethnicity and the common language because they feel that that is what binds them all together as global Jews. So, in the danger which I want to ask you about is, do you feel that if like a really good translation is done, then we ourselves as second or third generation Sikhs here in different parts of the world will not read the Guru Granth Sahib and just take some middleman's interpretation of it?
You've made a loaded question with lots of little things in it. The Jews, since they are so successful in worldly matters, look to us like a monolithic block, and they are not. There are as many divisions within the Jews as there are within Punjabis. Culturally, they are very much like that, and they fight to no end. I will tell you that the Orthodox, for example, cannot start a service, a sangat, unless there are 10 men, a minyan. Not 9 men and a woman. Not 9 women and a man. No, 10 men. He cannot legally start it. However, the Reformed Jews are different. They are in many ways cultural Jews, they would say. So we have divisions as well. We need to have a platform, this could evolve into that, where we can all come together and put our perspectives, differ, keep to our practices, and differ, and yet not become disagreeable. And that's that. And the Christian denominations, of course, there are 200, well, I used to say 250, but I think there are more than 1,000 denominations, because they differ in matters of interpretation. As I said, this Bible that's now in English, a scholar said, I'd rather be torn by wild horses than have this thrust upon the English people as a translation. And that's the translation. So, have a translation. And there'll be any translation that you pick. And there'll be parts where you will say, is that what the Guru likely meant? That I should be looking for my ancestors in cockroaches or wherever? If I'm going to take literally the birth and rebirth, the cycle issue, is that what we likely meant? I would say no. Not necessarily. I have my good friend Guru Mastak Singh sitting there, and much of that community, for example, might tell me that Sikhi says, do not eat meat. You can't eat that. Sikhi teaches that. And I've seen many Sikhs teach that. Now, my interpretation would differ. And I can cite the lines from Gurbani to quote again, what the Guru talks to me is limited by what's in my head. The limit is in my head, not the Guru's talking. All right? So the differences are many. And the Jews, I could give you a lecture on the differences, how the Jews differ, but we'll let them rest. So celebrate our differences, but celebrate together. There's the big tent of Sikhi, which has in it people of all shades and opinions. Keshatari and non-Keshataris as well, the Sajtaris as well, the fellow travelers as well. The big tent, to me, it's like a marathon. 10,000 people start it. Maybe a few will finish it. And maybe a few will finish in 6 hours. Maybe a few will finish in Olympic time. And a few might take a day or two. And a few, like me, may only wander around slowly and never finish. But they're all on the same path, in the same direction. That's all I see. And that's again no answer. I'll live up to my reputation. Okay. Don't worry. My essential nature.
The view with the bias. Okay.
Mine is the view, yours is the bias. That's okay.
There's 2 questions which are quite similar. How can we Sikhs enable the Guru Granth Sahib translations to reach the masses?
Say that again, sorry.
How can we Sikhs enable the Guru Granth Sahib translations to reach the masses, irrespective of caste, creed, and religion? And a similar question, any thoughts on how to start such a project?
I sometimes think, people say, how can we teach the young? How can we reach the society around us? How can we do this or that? And my answer to that is rather direct. You cannot teach others what you don't know, and you cannot teach others what you don't practice. Not your kids, not your neighbors, not others. So the first has to start from that. And what we are doing here today is that movement. What you need is a million movements like this, a million cells like this. Am I right, Dr. Singh? Okay.
So perfect timing. The timer just went off. We're done with our 40 minutes. There are a couple of questions. May I suggest that we can pass them on to Professor Saab, and then he can either talk to the people directly later or an email. So I'm going to pass you the other questions.
Sure. I will look at these, and who knows, that's how I think of what essays to write. Some questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Bole So Nihal.